All right, thanks everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Aspire Tech Talk. I'm Don Linford. I'm Aspire's Innovation Director. And I know there's still people joining us, but I just wanted to remind everyone about our Aspire annual meeting that will take place in October. Many of you should have seen a slew of invitations coming out over the last day or two. And if you haven't received yours yet, don't worry, in the next day or two, you'll be receiving it. If you don't have something by Friday, then please reach out to me and let me know. But we want to make sure that you're aware of it and that you have a chance to sign up. So our presentation today, just to remind everyone, will be about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A and some interaction during the discussion. I'm also recording it so that you're aware of that, and it'll be available on our Aspire website later. As we begin, I wanted to bring some context about our talents within Aspire, because our two presenters represent students of Aspire. And one of the value propositions that Aspire has is the opportunity to have engagement with our student talents. So our presenters today are part of the pool of the talents that we have within Aspire. Specifically, you as members of Aspire, you're able to engage with our students through a couple of specific opportunities. And I'd like to share what some of those are just briefly so that you know what it is. One of those is internships. So I know that you'll be receiving some specific communication about this in the coming days. But I just want to make sure that there's an opportunity that's linked to our annual meeting, which is our virtual career fair. This will give you an opportunity to meet with our students at the annual meeting, but we're going to also have an opportunity to create in the next month your ability to engage with our students. The second one is webinar, where we need presenters to present on specific topics that our student talents have requested that are of interest to them. And then the third one is the cohort mentoring trip. As it relates to internships, we do have a metric with the National Science Foundation where we'd like to have at least 2 placements of interns from each of our core campuses. So that's approximately 8 interns. We're creating a structure in which we really want to engage you as members and to understand how we're going to be able to format internships and meet the needs that you may have, but also match that with the talents that we have within the center. So first thing that you see here is a bit of a matrix that we're using so we kind of understand who we're engaging with, who's the primary contact, because we know that many of you may be the stakeholder, the sponsor, but we do need to deal with your human resource department or talent management people. So we want to make sure that we're doing that and we have the right contacts. The other one is related to postings. We know that you not always can dedicate an Aspire internship. You can't have necessarily a specific internship for Aspire, but we know that we're competitive for the internships, or you may be able to sponsor one yourself. But we want to be able to track those postings so we can direct that to our students. And within the structure of the internships, we actually have kind of a format of what we talk about 3 internships. We have general Aspire internships, which covers all the categories we're talking about. We do have opportunities at times for NSF funded internship programs. This is something I can talk more about later, and we can have a specific perhaps tech talk on it. But this is one in which the NSF actually funds the internship program, so we have to go through and meet deadlines for that, and then later we find out if there's funding or not. And just recently, we've been asked to help support an economic development agency internship for undergrads that actually is interviewing through fall, will begin summer next year of 2023. So there's great opportunities for us to engage in students with internships through that. The other one is a virtual career fair. So we're looking this month to really see if we can engage with you as members, looking forward to the fall, spring, next summer internships, that you may have positions that are coming open. You may actually be in a budget process, so you may not know next year, for example, what internships you may have, but this is a good opportunity to start exploring the talents that are within Aspire. So we'd like you to think about this and maybe submit open positions or potential positions to the email, and you'll receive a specific message on this. What we'd like to do in September is have an online information session about your organization, how to collaborate and highlight your positions with the talents. Then during October, the first part, you'll have an opportunity to look at resumes or students would be interested in meeting with you at our annual meeting. So I put the emails here for both Carolyn, who is part of our talent management group, as well as myself. So if you have questions, but you'll be receiving specific information about this in the coming days, just so you're aware of it. And the next one is the webinar. We really have an opportunity for you, as people are very articulate, very intelligent about subject matters of interest. And these are the type of topics that our students are interested in, have people come and present as to what is available. So these are potential topics. We do have a couple of confirmed speakers, but this you'll also receive in the message. It gives you a chance to look at a topic here. And if you're interested in presenting through a webinar, that is something we'd really like you to be able to engage with us. And then the last one is the cohort trip. We have a cohort trip that's going to come up in November. I believe it's targeted for Texas, UTEP, as well as Colorado. And as industry members, you have the chance to really have a more personal interaction with our interns, mentor them, be part of the trip, and or have them at your organization, show them what you're doing. So these are 3 great opportunities that coming up that we have for you to engage with our talents within our center. Now, going to our presenters. So it's my pleasure to introduce you as our presenters today for our Aspire Market Intelligence team. We have Elena Hall, who has a Bachelor's of Science degree in economics from Utah State University, and is also a master's student of applied mathematics at Colorado University Boulder. Zach Archibald is an undergrad student at Utah State University in economics and political science. Elena is the project lead also for our Aspire Baseline Report and is part of our Societal Impact Committee. Zach is the representative from USU on the Aspire Student Leadership Council, and he obviously has many things he does to support the center through different committees and projects. So they'll lead us through a discussion of measuring Aspire's unique impact via baseline metrics of looking towards 2050. And I believe all of you can appreciate the center is quite new over the last couple of years. So creating a baseline is very important in order for us to measure our progress and make sure that we're moving forward or not. And thus being this topic for me today is very interesting. So Elena, Zach, to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I am so happy to be here and be able to kind of show you some of the work we've been doing on this baseline report. So let me get this screen shared with you really quickly. And here we are. Okay. So, as Don mentioned, in September of 2020, Utah State University and other universities, including Purdue, University of Texas, El Paso, University of Auckland, New Zealand, and my current university, University of Colorado Boulder, were awarded a $50 million research center grant to be distributed over 10 years for the purpose of advancing roadway electrification. And this is an aspirational goal for the lifetime of Aspire. Currently, we're talking about pathways and how do we advance roadway electrification? Why are we interested in roadway electrification? And the goal is to eliminate barriers of access and adoption, such as range and charging, in order to improve health and quality of life for everyone. So for roadway electrification, the baseline analysis report it's our starting point. It's centered around data from 2020, based on when Aspire started. And you might be wondering why we're just now kind of completing this a little over halfway through 2022. And honestly, it's just data takes a long time to process. And it's only just recently that a lot of these data sets have become available to us. And so saying that we're completing this doesn't mean that the baseline report is perfect and that it's totally done. It is definitely still work in progress because of several factors. One is the newness of related research, and there are also some unknown factors and incomplete information that Aspire may need in the future. And we also have a variety of Aspire members and industry leaders that are providing input and guidance. So as we are attempting a professional analysis of baseline data, we're really always interested in feedback and ideas that will improve it. And we're looking for contributions from everyone coming together in our broad Aspire ecosystem to create a pervasive and cost-effective transportation solution. So to understand the baseline report, first, we need to understand Aspire's 2050 goals to give it context. So the first goal has to do with transportation electrification. So by 2050, we want 70% of energy used in transportation to be electric. And this includes not only adoption of light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, but the electrification of off-road and non-road vehicles, public transit, including rail, water, air, hydrogen fuel cells, our chargers and charging infrastructure, but also our electricity generation and consumption, because we're also interested in not only having our energy be electric, but where that is being generated from. We want to, pursue clean energy solutions. So, and then our next goal is a reduction of GHG and pollution. So we're striving for a 60% reduction in total annual GHG emissions and urban air pollution emissions. And so not only does this goal talk about transportation emissions, but the health implications of pollutants and our overall air quality. Cost reduction is another really big piece of the puzzle, and we would like to see a 35% reduction in the total average cost to move people and goods by 2050. So the purchase price of vehicles, maintenance costs, energy and fuel costs are all a part of this, in addition to health costs from air pollution. Our workforce goal is the creation of 5 million new jobs and the retooling of 10 million jobs through transformations in related industries. So these industries that we want to retool and see new jobs in include oil and gas, transportation, electric utility, construction, urban planning, clean energy, and many others. And one of the main kind of goals of Aspire, and one of the ways we will achieve success, is through diversity. So we are wanting a workforce diversity within these transformed industries that support electrified transportation to reflect the populations that they work in. So those are our goals. And we have been compiling a significant amount of data, like 120 pages worth of data related to these goals, using sources that are both public and reliable. So sources like the US Department of Energy, of course, International Council on Clean Transportation, Atlas EV Hub, and a lot more. And the reason we've been so particular with our data sources is that this information needs to come from open and dependable places that will continue to update that data in future years. We need to have this information be as consistent as possible so that when we create future reports tracking progress, we can have a direct comparison with the initial report and not as much static that we have to sort through. Now, there are some challenges that we've encountered in preparing the baseline report. And one challenge is that we do have to actually filter out some information that's not as relevant from the report. I think we were talking and Dawn mentioned something about not trying to boil the ocean. So, for example, we had information about electric vehicle technician training program costs for the cost reduction goal. But kind of as we talked about it and looked at it, we realized that it wasn't a major factor in cost reduction, because essentially the vehicle technicians who were training for internal combustion engines would just transition to electric vehicles over time as the market transitioned. So that's just one example of how we've had to filter. And another challenge is finding sources for specific types of data. So heavy duty electric vehicles, as well as off-road and non-road vehicles, have been particularly challenging. And diversity for electric vehicle specific jobs and workforce numbers of sectors directly involved with electric vehicles are available, but inconsistent if you look at various sources. So the first challenge of filtering is and will continue to be resolved through learning and collaboration and, maybe a little bit of trial and error in there. But the second challenge of data sources will hopefully be fixed by the influx of research and data collection in these fields. I mean, we're already seeing an exponential increase in the number of studies in areas like heavy duty and medium duty electric vehicles, which is wonderful and really makes me really excited to see. So with the understanding that the baseline report is kind of an ever-evolving document, and also that this data doesn't reflect the current situation, it's 2020. I'd like to share with you just a brief overview of our assessment of the 2020 baseline data. So, transportation electrification. You'll remember that the goal is 70% of energy used in transportation to be electric, and 3.3% of energy used in transportation is electric in 2020. And this information includes, and it was calculated using charging infrastructure, public transit, and the 2.4% adoption of light duty vehicles, including hybrid electric vehicles. The next goal of GHG and pollution reduction, striving for a 60% reduction in our total annual emissions. At the moment, or in 2020, 27% of total US emissions was attributed to the transportation sector. And if the total amount of emissions stayed the same, that would equate to about an 11% goal from the transportation sector. But hopefully, all of the emissions and pollution is reduced, is the main goal. And so that means that we are trying to get the transportation sector down to a little over 650 million metric tons. And so that is our goal there. And cost reduction, obviously we don't have kind of a percentage point of where cost reduction is, but a 35% reduction in total average cost is the goal. And right now, the purchase price of electric vehicles is approximately 1.75 times more than their internal combustion engine counterparts. And this is including light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. On the positive note, fuel cost savings are at their highest about 40 to 50%, maybe a lot more at the moment, but maintenance costs for light duty electric vehicles are also 30% lower than their counterparts. In our workforce, 14.9% of vehicle jobs are clean vehicle specific. So clean vehicles has about 270 workers, and gasoline and diesel motor vehicles has about 1.8 million workers. Diversity, what we found was that women make up under 30% of workers in almost all of the energy and transportation sectors, and Black or African American workers average 2 to 3% less than the national workforce averages in those same sectors, while the rest of the workforce is very similar to national workforce averages in terms of racial and ethnic diversity. So that was a lot of information to spit out at you, and I'm sorry about that, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what we've been working so hard on. And you might be thinking that these are some big goals, and also, like, how are we going to determine whether Aspire is actually having an impact, or if the progress being made is due to factors outside of our purview? And that is a fantastic question. And it's currently being discussed by the Societal Impact Committee that I'm lucky to participate in and learn from, which is made up of experts such as yourselves. And we have people from the Clean Cities Coalitions, Kenworth Truck Company, AECOM, many more. And we're all working together to set milestones for Aspire and determine these leading or input metrics that reflect what is being done to further the achievement of Aspire's goals, and trailing or output metrics that reflect changes in results addressed by these goals. Our current conversations have been centered around what these metrics are, what they should be, how we're going to, find the information. And again, one of the challenges is availability of specific data. So I'm going to list and briefly discuss some of these metrics we've been talking about to give you all an idea of the process. And I would love if you have any ideas for additional or alternate metrics. I'd love to discuss those after Zach's presentation, because this is something we're really working on. So leading metrics. Right now, we're kind of looking at public and private funding for transportation electrification projects, adoption of policies tied to EVs and GHG emission reduction, efficiency of new green electricity technology and investments in infrastructure, especially ones reducing battery size requirements, and students enrolled in STEM education. Some of these trailing or output metrics that we are talking about are, of course, adoption of electric vehicles by class and miles driven by those vehicle classes, as well as the GHG emissions broken down specifically by vehicle class. We're also looking at cost per mile for transport, number of new jobs in each sector, and possibly increases in membership of groups such as Women of EVs and growth in apprenticeship programs. And those last two kind of ideas will help give us some really useful diversity data as well, which is one of the kind of harder areas to find data on. So I've mentioned, that these are some big goals, and it's a really big project to see Aspire's impact, but we have incredible work being done by Aspire faculty and students on projects that are truly poised to move the needle. And so this kind of shows an overview of the main projects we have, which are extreme fast charging, pavement integrated wireless charging, smart and secure charge management, system of systems integration, as well as learning and engagement. And I'd like to share some of these amazing tasks that fall under these project umbrellas to show you how they relate to the baseline report. So one team is addressing the challenge of designing integrated wireless charging systems that can withstand the environment of the roads efficiently and without failure due to high temperatures or large mechanical loads. And they're using thermal analysis to do so. They just recently completed a few initial full system experiments back in May. And this project really helps to advance the goal of roadway electrification as well as cost reduction, because it's creating a viable long-term in motion charging solution. And another group has developed an EV charging station allocation algorithm that takes into account emissions induced by EV charging. So this is addressing Aspire's goals of minimizing cost and lowering emissions due to scheduling and allocation. So we also have Aspire faculty and students involved in researching air quality near electrified ports. So due to the amount of traffic in ports, communities that surround them are often disproportionately impacted by pollution from vehicle emissions. And in addition, many of these near port communities are communities of color due to structural racism. And to address this, Aspire is researching how electrification of the port could reduce emissions that harm the members of the community. And so faculty and graduate students are partnering with Utah Clean Cities, and they've started to identify gaps in the monitoring of the air quality in the near port community in Salt Lake City in Utah. And they're conducting research to fill those gaps. This has monumental implications for not only the reduction of emissions and pollution and the increase in health and quality of life, but for the diversity and inclusion that's central to achieving these goals. And one of the most important pieces of the puzzle is our learning and engagement project. So these are 2050 goals. That is 27, 28 years away. And yeah, and many of the people who are going to be instrumental in achieving these goals, they may not even know that they want to be engineers yet. So in particular, the goal of having workforces that reflect their communities, it begins with young students. And you can kind of see in this graphic from that team, it shows the pathways of Aspire engineering and workforce development programs and how they're getting people involved and really getting them to participate in this industry. So there's a pre-college team, and their goal is to implement Aspire themed collaborative K-12 engineering education programming. So throughout the past year, they've had 15 or so workshops and activities to inspire these future engineers. There were 89 high school students enrolled in Latinos in Action programs, or MESA, which is Mathematics, Engineering, and Science Achievement programs in local school districts. And they, participated in and designed solutions to EV related problems. They participated in demonstrations at USU's EV track and concrete testing lab, and really just learn more about careers associated with EVs and EV roadways and infrastructures. Aspire is also great at capitalizing on the importance of mentorship, both for the mentor and the mentee. And so Aspire undergraduates mentored 54 fourth grade students from the Edith Bowen Lab School, and they designed and worked on solutions for 3 engineering challenges related to sustainability and EVs. So just to give a small example of how impactful these activities are, after an Aspire USU EVR open house back in May, they conducted a little survey, and it showed that the kids who attended reported like an 80% increase in their interest in becoming an engineer. So these are just a few examples of the important projects that Aspire faculty, students, and members are working on that I'm really excited about. And they clearly show how we're going to make an impact and reach our goals and make a difference in this baseline. So, and another factor is policy. And I mentioned it briefly as a leading metric, because while Aspire is not directly influencing policy, policy has an obvious impact on Aspire and our goals. And it also provides a wonderful framework and context for our research. So I am definitely not the expert on policy though, and I am thrilled to turn the time over to your other presenter who is actually a true wealth of knowledge on the subject. And so I'll turn the time over to Zach.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm currently recovering from COVID, so I'm working with a little bit of a weak voice, so I apologize for that. So hopefully you guys can all hear me okay. Let me get my screen shared here for you guys. Let's see. There we go. Okay, hopefully we can all see that. So in consideration of policy in our conversation surrounding the baseline report, policy really was a major component of our discussion and kind of deciding how to incorporate it into our baseline project. So we had discussed maybe including it as a goal in some sense, but to that end, it just really doesn't fit as a goal per se. But policy really is intertwined through every step of this process that we're moving through as we look at baseline goals in the future towards 2050. And as Elena mentioned regarding leading metrics and trailing metrics, policy really does stand as a huge leading metric that to measure the progress and kind of the expectations for the future of our goals and our progress towards them. Let's see, and then looking at this was an article that came out last month from Bloomberg that had a lot of people discussing kind of the US reaching perhaps the tipping point for mass adoption of electric vehicles. So kind of according to their analysis, once you reach this 5% point of new car sales being fully electric, everything changes. And this kind of has a lot of discussion on whether or not the US, is at this point where we are at this tipping point and everything's about to change. According to their analysis, the Biden administration's 2030 goal of having 50% of new car sales being fully electric is surpassable and probably can even do that a few years beforehand, according to what they've seen in other countries. But we do need that supportive framework, and these leading metrics do need to kind of show that we are on that track. So kind of to discuss the impact of current policies that we've seen, the last decade and the last 2 decades have seen some large policy moves towards transportation electrification that stand as pretty strong leading metrics for us to look at. More recently, the investments or the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, the IIJA, passed by the Biden administration, includes billions of dollars in funding for transportation electrification. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, has upwards of $7 billion in funding to get infrastructure throughout the U.S. for vehicles, $5 billion for a clean school bus program, $5.6 billion for a low and no emission transit bus program. So there is a lot of these funding opportunities available that we're seeing. For example, when it comes to transit buses and funding there, we are seeing districts utilizing this funding to surpass, as Elena mentioned, with that cost problem. They do have a higher cost, but when this funding is available, we are seeing districts utilizing the funding and adopting lower no emission transit buses. Another popular program that has got a lot of talk this week with the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Biden administration is the EV tax credit program. Originally, this program offered about $7,500 off as a tax credit for purchasing new electric vehicles, with each manufacturer being given a 200,000 vehicle cap towards this end. General Motors and Tesla had both reached this cap, and there was a lot of discussion about renewing it. And it did get renewed in the program, but there were a lot of changes to it. And a lot of these changes, are still up for discussion, kind of what we're going to see in the future. But one of the major things to discuss with changes to this is its impacts on lower income and economically disadvantaged communities. In the previous program, about upwards of 80% of the tax credits utilized were by individuals making over $100,000 a year, and nearly 10% of these tax credits were utilized by individuals making over $1 million a year. So we did see that these tax credits weren't necessarily going to those who, were having issues affording these vehicles. And when looking at, the adoption of vehicles out there, we do see a disproportionately low number of EVs adopted by lower income and economically disadvantaged communities. So with the newer tax credit program just released, it does include a cap on the vehicle price to qualify, as well as a cap on the income of the individual purchasing in order to qualify. And it even expands the tax credit to include another tax credit for used electric vehicles as well. So it will be interesting now to see how this acts as a leading metric going forward, and if this will help on the side of economically disadvantaged communities being able to purchase electric vehicles. Though there is still the problem of charging infrastructure and access to these methods of charging. In terms of when you talk about policy, we often hear the example of the carrot or the stick. Are you are you prodding them forward with a stick, or using an incentive or a carrot? And kind of one of the examples that we see of sticks is stricter fuel efficiency or emission standards. A lot of EU nations in this method have set direct guidelines and direct goals per se of we will no longer sell ICE vehicles after 2030, 2035. We've seen some states adopt metrics like this, but there so far hasn't been like a firm nationwide mandate for this. Looking at kind of our status for EV registration right now, in terms of adoption rates of light duty passenger vehicles, we are seeing there's quite a few states now that in this dark green color here on this graph have over 30 electric vehicles registered per 10,000 people. A lot of it aligned with incentives and access to infrastructure in the area. And when looking at medium and heavy duty commercial vehicles, there is also substantial adoption. When it comes to, if you look at the graph here towards the bottom, you'll see yard tractors are actually currently the most adopted heavy duty vehicle. And it is a lot of it because ports and have had a large early emphasis on electrification. So New Jersey, New York, California, Texas, these are all states that have implemented policy programs to help purchase electrified yard tractors to use at ports. And this has been, although yard tractors represent a really small portion of the total heavy duty vehicles deployed on the road, it really has been an early foothold due to technological innovations and a supportive policy framework to help this industry really show what policy can do as a leading metric and helping get that adoption moving forward. To talk about some gaps and barriers in current policy, kind of address where we're still seeing, we're missing the mark, and if changes aren't made, there could still be issues. This is not at all a holistic list, just kind of some major, recent policy discussions or just overall gaps that I've seen when looking at the sector. If you've been privy to Aspire conversations in the past about policy, you've most likely heard of US Code 23, Section 111. So this is a code that prohibits the sale of energy on interstates in the US. And this presents a major barrier to Aspire's goals of wireless in-motion charging on major roads in the United States, as it prevents a lot of automakers from wanting to adopt wireless charging technology in their vehicles. It prevents a lot of private investment or partners coming along and really investing and diving in on this project. It's definitely a major policy barrier for this technology Aspire's developing. And kind of alongside that, NEVI, the National EV Infrastructure Funding, has been a massive program. We've seen states releasing kind of their plans on how they want to utilize this funding. And to date, it's primarily only focused on plug-in charging as well, and primarily focused on light-duty vehicles. And this kind of seems a bit of a miss as well, because when it comes to infrastructure and needs for the sector, the heavy duty transportation, though it is a very small portion of vehicles on the road, they're polluting upwards of 30% of total emissions in the transportation sector. And if you really do want to reduce that emissions, then the heavy duty sector really is kind of in need of where this charging infrastructure has to develop and reduce these emissions on the road. And as we've kind of worked with some of these plans and submitted public comments, that's kind of been one issue we've run into, is as we've looked at our research and as we've looked at what states are doing, this does seem to be an area that without changes might be lagging behind and might not be where we expect it to be in the future. A big miss that we've seen kind of in barriers in current policy as well is a lack of charging infrastructure available for individuals living in economically disadvantaged communities, multifamily housing. As Elena mentioned regarding these communities, there is a very disproportionate impact of where air pollution hits. The near community or the near port community in Salt Lake is another good example of people who need this charging infrastructure and would really benefit from being able to utilize this technology, but it really isn't making it to them yet. There is some hope that the revamp to the EV tax credit and maybe some of this NEVI funding could help with that, but there definitely is a gap in this area that needs to be addressed. And kind of another big gap, as we've talked with the power grid and energy generation, if we all expect to switch to EVs and utilize in-motion charging, there needs to be significant upgrades and expansion to the power grid. Most estimates find that if most Americans switch to EVs, power generation is going to need to double. So we're going to need more power lines, the ability to send energy farther. And also, if we want it to be renewable, that's going to be a lot of work, a lot of partnership. A lot of renewable energy is generated in the inlands of the United States, and a lot of the population is on the coasts. So it will require a lot of partnership and kind of a lot of challenges as we work to address that. So that's kind of a piece on policy. We wanted to leave some time for audience interaction. We have some really cool people here in the audience, so we would love to hear your thoughts on anything shared in my presentation here or Elena's presentation regarding anything you found interesting or any input or any comments. So I think with that said, I will turn this over to the audience.
So I would just like to answer a quick question that appeared in the chat just about the data behind EVs costing 1.75 times more than their internal combustion counterparts. So that was just a very brief overview where I kind of combined the costs of both medium duty, heavy duty, and light duty vehicles. And so a lot of these really large heavy duty vehicles cost almost double what their light duty counterparts did, internal combustion counterparts, in 2020. So again, remembering that this data is from like 2 years ago is part of it. And the other part is that I just kind of combined it all just for brief overview.
I'll jump in with a question. This is Fawn. I thank you both for this presentation. You've shared some really great information, some of it which I knew and some of it which I didn't. I have follow-up questions that have come from the community, actually, as I've interacted with communities near the inland port. Both of them actually come back from your comments. One was regarding wires. You talked about as this infrastructure grows that we're going to need more wires. I had one community member ask, and this was actually my very first community meeting when I was so new to Aspire, asked, what will this mean for our community? Is this going to mean more ugly wires? And I said, I'm not going to speak to that. I'm too new, but I will find that answer. And then in another vein, kind of a similar situation, I had been in Aspire longer, but still didn't know, the right answer to give. I think it's really important that I give good, accurate information, but it was just that question of, as we transition to electric, power needs to be generated in some spaces and then provided to other spaces by and large. And I was talking to someone who now lives in the inland port area, Salt Lake's west side, but he's from a rural area in Utah. So that response for him would not be very compelling to say, well, don't worry, we're not going to generate the electricity here in Utah or in Salt Lake. We're going to generate it in your parents' backyard. So one, I'm wondering if you or anyone else on the call has answers to those questions. And two, as kind of a center-wide question, are there ways that we can maybe create some repositories for this information, including the great information that you've shared today?
Yeah, to those questions and community input you've provided there, that really does kind of nail the issue that we have to deal with moving through this topic. In terms of the first one, and wires in these communities, it is a a real problem where a lot of times, I know it was an issue in Salt Lake, even with cell towers just kind of being put in the middle of these communities here, power lines as well. A lot of that does come down to the choice of the power company, and a lot of it comes down to uh, working with your community to organize and kind of share your thoughts on trying to get uh, not have to have wires all throughout your community. And I know for what I've heard in the past on this topic, it definitely is possible to bury the wires and have them underground for a higher cost. That often doesn't seem to happen for these communities. Um, so in terms of kind of the technology we're looking at, it I don't know if it's something Aspire directly can solve, but I know that we can be part of the conversation on this and really try to, help alleviate these concerns. Because being in these communities and walking around and really seeing, kind of these impacts, and being at the forefront of the situations they're working through, it definitely is a very serious thing. And I don't know if there's anyone on the call with direct knowledge of, of how you could avoid, lines and other problems like that in these communities. Um, yeah, I don't know if there's an easy answer to it for sure. And then in terms of the issue of power generation, that is the thing. There is the issue of needing to put windmills and solar panels in rural areas. And I know I've heard a lot of benefits coming from this. I've heard there's a mayor in Wyoming whose community has benefited from having a lot of windmills generating revenue and jobs for their community. So I think if you have an approach where you're turning it into a situation where you're providing jobs and really getting community input rather than just putting them there and saying deal with it, I think working with the community and having listening and hearing their thoughts, concerns, and making sure they're involved in the process really is a huge component of working through this.
Thanks, Zach. And I know there are no easy answers, so that's by no means a critique on the information you've shared. I would just like to keep it on Aspire's radar, maybe to be thinking about ways to keep track of the questions, because the communities are asking really good, thought out questions, and where we can keep good, solid information so that good information is flowing in both directions. But again, thanks for a great job.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great input. I definitely want to follow up with you on that and make sure we can, put something together like that. It's important we really do engage with communities and not just, hear their concerns, but also act on them and make sure they're included going forward.
I have a question. My name is Matt Jones. I'm an Aspire research engineer. Earlier then, you guys said that it's one of Aspire's 2050 goals to have 70% of transportation energy be electric. And I'm wondering, if Aspire did not exist, do you know what the current trend would be? Like, how much would Aspire need to move the dial to get to 70%? And what would the trend be without our inputs and contributions?
That is a great question. I'm not sure if that's not something I've necessarily directly looked into, but I think that's kind of what we're trying to determine in the Societal Impact Committee right now is how are we directly moving the needle? So I think that is one of the questions we're trying to answer. I'm not sure. I know there are a bunch of predictions for how much is going to be adopted by 2035, 2040. And so there are those predictions out there, and I'm not sure what the gap would be without Aspire. And I think that's just what we're trying to figure out right now. Zach, do you have any other kind of thoughts on that?
In terms of, I don't know, looking at our research so far, I don't know if we've done a ton of projecting the future yet. We've kind of established what we need to watch going forward. In terms of the data we've gathered, we've mostly established kind of those 2020 numbers and what to look at going forward. So I know I could probably put together some information to send your way afterwards, but Bloomberg has a division called it's Bloomberg NEF, I forget the abbreviation, but they do a lot of these projections looking at, I think it's New Energy Finance actually, but they do a lot of projections looking at the future of EV projections, future of energy projections. And I believe that would have an answer to your question of kind of what just the general trend has been for power generation sources and what the future of transportation generally looks like. They kind of use two different paths to predict. They kind of have what they call a net zero scenario, which is assuming aggressive policies and assuming a big goal to get to renewable energy and electric vehicles kind of as quick as possible. They also have an economic transition scenario, kind of assuming the status quo. So that would probably be closer to what that would be. So I'd be happy to kind of send some of those materials your way if you'd be interested.
Sure, that'd be great. And great work, wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi. I'm Adil from Enril, and I was actually having a question like the solicitation like you are like putting up. Are you looking for some collaborations for carrying out some work, or is it like you are just advertising the program, or like you are just telling about the work which is already going on and there are certain opportunities for us to collaborate? Can you just stress upon this?
It's a little fuzzy. I am so sorry. I couldn't quite, there was a little bit of static. I couldn't quite understand what the question was.
Okay, so, sorry,
if-
I will just try to be more clear. I just wanted to know, like the solicitation, what you have bringing up, are you looking for some collaborations?
Oh, for the leading and trailing metrics for the Societal Impact Committee?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
electrification.
Yeah, I think, so we're working on it as a Societal Impact Committee, but if you have any kind of input or ideas, it's kind of a broad thing, and there's always so much value in different perspectives. So if you have any collaborative ideas, we would love that. And you can reach out to me or Dawn or Talis, and yeah, we would love that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Just checking if we have any more or last comments or questions, and absolutely, thank you so much, Adil. We are looking for collaboration, so whatever you can do to help, that would be awesome. Well, if there's no other comments, I'd just like to thanks everyone for joining. Today's presentation will be available for review on our website later. We'll be posting that out. Just want to give a heads up again that we have our annual meeting in October. Because of a national conference at NSF in September and the annual meeting in October, we're going to be reviewing our Tech Talk schedule, but we'll come back to you and kind of give you what we're planning in the coming months, and also what will the topics be. Just as a last thing in the chat, I put my email and Carolyn's email for those of you who are interested to be involved in engaging with our talents like Zach and Elena. Please reach out to us. We do have those opportunities around the internship, the career fair, the virtual career fair, the webinar, as well as the cohort trip. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining today.